Hello and welcome again to the recording of The Crystal Cocoon. I am your host today, Hannah Neal, and I am with my co-hosts and friends,
Jesse
and Brandon.
Woo. So we are excited to be here again and be able to have a discussion. Today's topic, we are talking about empathic awareness and being an empath. And each of us has really different perspectives because each of us has come to our awareness in our own particular way. So let's start the discussion with, so Jesse, what do you see as an empath? And do you identify as one?
Well, I guess I would say that I identify an empath as being somebody who is not just seeing and hearing and smelling and tasting the world around them, but they're sensing and feeling it on some other level. For myself, I almost feel more in touch with the empathic part of my experience of the world. How does it feel when I'm connecting with somebody? I look at them while they're talking to me and I hear the words that they're saying, but I also am feeling what's behind those words and feeling what their experience is. And if I'm really tuned in, I'm almost seeing more the nature behind what's motivating their actions and behaviors. So when having a conversation, I feel like I'm having many conversations. And sometimes it's hard to be able to focus in, oh, wait, that's right, they said this. And that's what I'm supposed to respond to, not what I'm sensing or what I'm feeling. So that to me is really at the crux of the nature of being an empath.
Definitely. And what about you, Brandon?
Yeah, what she said.
Exactly.
No, I think that being an empath, like, are we asking what is an empath or the story of
Yes.
Yes, okay, that's what I thought. So I guess for me, realizing I was an empath, it wasn't until way later, I forget, it was like 2006 or 5 or something. I went to this place. There was this Universal Life Church, and I was there, and it was some event after like church was over. It was an extra event, and I was sitting there, and there was somebody who was kind of upset in the room, and I was really bothered by him. I mean, like, I just felt like, man, why is that guy still here? He's kind of like upsetting the whole room, and like, really,
It's messing up the vibe.
It really wasn't upsetting the whole room, but it was like, I could feel it though. And then one guy was sitting there, was one of the priests there, I guess, and he was sitting there watching me. And then I went over and sat by him, and then he's like, you know you're an empath. I'm like, what? He's like, yeah, you're an empath. I'm like, oh, okay. And he also told me I was an earth angel. I'm like, what's that? He's like, oh, never mind. You'll figure it out. Okay.
Oh, all right.
If you say so. So yeah, from there I was like, oh, okay. So I started looking into it and started kind of like exploring that a little more and what that meant. I'm like, I guess I do walk into rooms and I feel what's going on in the room. I guess I do kind of feel like in my body, like certain places get upset when other people are going through things. And just kind of like when we're not really aware of things, we experience them and we don't really think about them because it's totally the way things are for us. We don't realize until we step out of that. We're like, oh, not everybody feels it this way. And thinking back, I can remember even my experience with animals growing up, how I could communicate with my animals like really easily. And I could tell them to do things and they would do it. And I didn't train them to do that. I had a cat that would follow me around, and it would actually it was a kitten too. It would play catch. It would come to its name. It would sleep on my head at night, which is
very cat-like.
Yeah. Curl up in my hair. I'm like, oh, get out of there. But the interesting thing, it was like, it would follow me like half a mile to school, and it was a mile long to walk to the bus stop. And I'd get too far. I'm like, okay, go home now. I was like, nope, keep going. And it'd turn around and just walk, and it'd look at me. I'm like, go on. And it would walk home. But, I never taught it to do that. It wasn't something I taught. It was this connection that I had that I knew it understood what I was saying. My dog was the same way. It would come up and it would feel when I was upset. I could talk to it and it'd look at me funny. And so I always felt like my dog knew what I was saying. And so I think looking back, there was always those moments that I can go back to that was like signs of empathic nature. Fast forward, learning to like put up my boundaries, my personal barriers, my personal like, okay, what do I want to take on? What is mine and what is not mine? Learning that sometimes I would get upset about things and I didn't really know why. And then I would look at it and go, is this mine? And I think that was one of the most profound questions for me as an empath, is to just ask the question, is this mine? And then I could start weeding out all these things. I'm like, oh, I don't want to take that on. Oh, I don't want to do that. That's not mine. And then from there, learning really how to fully embody my energy more so that I wasn't taking on others. And then it just became of like, if I'm feeling something, I just knew that it wasn't mine. The question, once you ask it enough, no longer is necessary in order to have the understanding that it's not. And so eventually it developed into something where, I was working on clients doing healing work and being able to feel like if I'm working in a certain area and all of a sudden my throat closes up, like, oh, what's going on there? Do you have this feeling? And they're like, yeah. I'm like, oh, okay. Mm-hmm. So, that's kind of been my journey as an empath.
Very, very cool. And I agree with you 100,000%. If I could agree, like infinite percent about learning mine versus not mine. That for me was really a crucial turning point in my empathic awareness. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I've been an empath since I was a child, just really sensitive. Not, again, realizing that not everyone can speak to animals. Not everyone can feel the days of the week. Not everyone, what does Friday feel like versus Monday? There is a definite difference, and an empath could tell you that.
Versus hump day.
Exactly. That midweek, mm-hmm. Having an attraction to nature, wanting to be around water, loving water all the time, and being sensitive to textures, to smells, to noises, and to experience. Some people are very loud and very brash. And when I was a child, that for me was really disconcerting because their energy was really loud. And so I was absorbing a lot and taking a lot in. And so having to get to that point where I realized, oh, I have a choice in what I take in. I have a choice in what I read. I have a choice that I don't have to accept everything that's around me. I can shift my energy and I can have a level of control about who I read, what I take in, all of those things. Because it used to be, in the beginning, I would be attracted to a lot of people who had a lot of issues. A lot of people who had childhood abuse issues, a lot of trauma, histories of sexual assault, domestic violence, a lot of those kinds of things. So people were always telling me their secrets. Even as a child, I had a neighborhood friend who just moved into our neighborhood, and he only lived there maybe a year. And I just knew, even as a 6-year-old, that little boy needed to be loved. He needed a friend. And he told me stories of how his mom was abusing him. And, as a 6-year-old, I had no idea what to do with that. I had no clue that, talking to an adult or helping him. But as an adult, I had to go back and realize, okay, that happened and that's okay. I did everything I was supposed to do in that little boy's life, which was show up and be a friend. That's what I was supposed to do. I didn't need to do anything beyond that. So there's been a lot of things that I've had to go back through in my life and realize, oh, that was an empathic issue. That was an empathic experience, and label it as such instead of, in my mind, I'd labeled a lot of things as bad. This was a bad experience. This was traumatizing. There were a lot of those words that were really triggering, and my experience was labeled through a lot of darkness because I didn't understand what was happening, and I didn't know what was going on. And so finding that word empath and then finding an explanation. Oh, this is why I feel things so intensely. This is why this experience was really shocking for me, but other people thought, well, you should just be able to, work through this, no problem. What's your problem? Well, for me, it was traumatic. Even something as simple as a car accident. I had a car accident. I think I was in the 3rd grade. a super icy day. We were hit head on by a car that couldn't stop. And my mom still sent us to school. And I spent the first 3 hours of that day nonstop crying. I even got sent to the principal's office because I was crying because I couldn't stop. And so for me, I had to go back because the people in my life at that time were like, you need to get yourself together. You need to go to class. You know, do we need to send you home? And in my mind was like, oh no, I'm being sent home because I'm bad. So I had to go back. Okay, talk to that little girl. You're fine. It's okay. That was just a really traumatic, you know, experience. You're okay. You're safe. There's no need to worry. And, you know, console that child in now as an adult by realizing, oh, you just experienced a lot. And there was a lot that came through that. So for me, empathic awareness has been a godsend, literally. It invigorated and helped me to understand new and really wonderful depths of who I am on multiple levels, and be able to do a lot of the energy work that we do together, where I can sense, you know, there's something going on here in your body. I'm feeling physical pain in your shoulders or your neck. Do you experience that? Oh, yeah, I do. I have a lot of neck pain. And, oh, okay. So, you know, let's work with that. So definitely.
Yeah, for me, you know, I as a child, I grew up in a house where empathic nature was kind of was commonplace. My mom was psychic. You know, she knew how I was feeling. She knew if I'd done something naughty before she even got home. So she would just like look at me, and I'd be like, oh, darn, I'm already busted.
That seems really unfair.
It was. It was really unfair, I felt. And so I kind of grew up with this awareness of it. And I understood that when I was interacting with people, that I was sensing from them, you know, things that they weren't expecting me to sense. You know, they were showing me a face of, you know, confidence and comfort, and I was feeling insecurity and doubt and unsureness so strongly from them. It was so hard to focus on what they were actually trying to tell me. I also grew up in the country, so I always lived in really small towns, really small areas, with, you know, lots of animals around us. So I remember when we first moved into the Pacific Grove area in California. It is a small town surrounded by other small towns, but you're isolated, you know, on this little peninsula. And there's a lot of nature because there's the ocean all around you, but there was just more people. Suddenly I started feeling more people, and I started to feel more overwhelmed, and I started developing social anxieties. And going to high school there, it was the largest high school I'd been at. There were 600 students. And that was a real shock for me. That was the first time I was really in an environment where at an assembly, sitting there, I felt so overwhelmed, and I had to kind of sneak out, you know, of the assembly. And then we moved to Portland, even further removed for me, from the nature. I was in the middle of the city, in a school with 6,000 students. That was incredibly overwhelming. My anxiety got much stronger. And there was so much information coming in, I just really couldn't understand any of it. So I shut a lot of it down. And I got to a place, you know, in adulthood, where I had shut so much of my, what I was reading down, that I almost felt isolated. Like I couldn't connect anymore. I couldn't pick up that information. And then it was just confusion. You know, I didn't understand what the motivation behind people was. So, you know, fast forward, I came to my husband. He's from another culture. He has a lot less feelings of you know, cultural imposition of, you know, psychics and empaths, or, you know, this woo-woo thing. He's more like, Jesse, you need to deal with this. You know, your headaches, your anxiety, your isolatory behavior. These are things that you need to deal with. You know, these are not health issues. These are energy issues. And I was so frustrated because I didn't want to be like my mom. I didn't want to be like, you know, these other empaths, woo-woos that I knew that lived out in the middle of nowhere. And I was like, no, that's not me. So, however, really embracing it when I started studying energy work and that aspect of my nature, it shifted so much, because having the awareness really did the mind, not mine question. it took so much of my fear away. You know, I thought for a while I was dying. I was sure I was dying. I was so sure I was dying about 3 years ago that I took myself to the emergency room a couple of times thinking I'd had a heart attack. And they took me in and they tested me and nope, your heart is fine. Nope, everything is fine. No, you don't have any of the antibodies that shows that you had a heart attack. And I'm like, I don't know, it hurts. And they gave me anti-anxiety medication through an IV and oh yeah, I felt a lot better.
It's amazing how those sedatives work.
Oh my goodness. So it turned out that a very old friend of mine that I have always had a really strong connection to was having heart issues at a very young age. And he was struggling with his heart and he was struggling with surviving. And he contacted me shortly after I'd come out of the hospital, emergency room, and I got a message from him and he mentioned, that he was having this heart issue. And it was like, boom, oh, that's not mine. I'm just picking that up from him. And that shifted everything for me. It went from being, oh, it's all inside of me and I'm just pulling all this stuff to, oh, I can receive. And then once I identify the source, I can also remove that from me. And that for me was the breaking point of being able to go, oh, that's what energy work is taking this information in, understanding what it is, what the root of it is, being able to know, oh, the emotion behind what's going on there. What's the energy that's driving that feeling, that sensation? Now that I can identify it, shifting it. How do you shift it? So it's the learning about your empathic nature is really learning who you are, I think. And so many of us struggle against it because of our belief systems, which we talk a lot about, and we'll talk more about that, the belief systems and how they shape and form the information that we receive. And so for me, I feel like if I can do one thing, it's getting people to understand it's not all yours.
Yeah, and the belief system too, it's not just about shaping and forming the information you receive, but it's also shaping and forming how you receive it and how you process it too.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I definitely used to take in a lot more information. And I used to assume it was all mine. Mm-hmm. So if I would feel somebody's sadness, I would start looking in my life and going, oh, okay, well, why am I sad? Oh, I'm sad because this happened. I'm sad because this happened. So I was making a lot of attachments and attributing causes to what I was feeling that was me related. So if I was picking up somebody's anger, oh, I was angry because of this. When really a lot of that was other people's stuff.
I think that's the most common thing that happens in the human experience, especially with people that aren't aware of what's really going on with themselves, is attributing from the logical sense of like, it must be this, oh, it must be this, even though if they really sat and thought about it, it doesn't really make any sense.
Right. Mm-hmm. And in a real logical sense, why would all of a sudden be feeling sadness right now for something that happened 2 days ago?
Yeah. Like, well, I don't normally feel sad when that happens, but we don't get that.
But I feel it right now.
Must be this.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that's another huge thing that when we talk about empaths taking responsibility, so many, and I know I did this too, so many empaths take responsibility for what they feel. Mm-hmm. And so not only taking it on like, oh, this is mine, but once they realize, okay, it's not mine. Oh, well, Jesse's feeling sad. So now I have to feel responsible for Jesse's sadness and I have to help her.
Mm-hmm. And make it come to an end.
Right. And I have to fix her. Oh, I have to fix Jesse. And that we sometimes as empaths create that belief where we have to help fix people because we can sense what they're feeling.
I feel like that's kind of step one in becoming a healer. When you first start doing energy work and you first start practicing as a healer, your first instinct is to go out, I'm going to heal the world.
I'm fixing everything. Yeah.
I'm going to fix everyone. Oh, you got a problem? Come here. Let me help you with it.
Mm-hmm. If you just let me do this thing, I'll feel better.
Yeah, trust me.
Just let me do it.
Right. Yeah.
I think a lot of us do that because once we start realizing the mind, not mine, and what we're here to do and what we're capable of as far as channeling energy, that it does become, it sets you apart in some ways. Mm-hmm. And for a lot of empaths, they have felt like they don't belong. They have felt like on the outskirts, isolated. And when they finally realize that they are empathic, it comes with this sort of blessing curse, depending on the day. Is
And
it
the exposure.
Right. Who's around me? Is it a curse today or is it a blessing? And the blessing part of it is when we do really get to help people. But then also understanding that what are some, Brandon, you talked about energetic boundaries.
Right.
And I think that's a really
Critical.
really, really important to talk about, because how do we deal sometimes with somebody in our life who's carrying a lot of dark energy, who's carrying a lot of sadness, or worse yet, which sometimes still triggers me, is anger.
Oh, anger is a big trigger.
Yeah, when people have a lot of rage inside of them, or sometimes even still deep sadness that will sometimes still trigger me. So, what do we do with that when we sense it?
I think for me, the biggest thing in order to not feel these things, and like you can try and like, put up these boundaries and these white lights and do all the little tricks the bubbles, all the other little tricks that energy workers will tell you to do in order to, quote, protect yourself. But I think what I found is that if you look within yourself, you'll always find a correlating trigger for some instance that occurred in your own life that allows you or doesn't allow you to disconnect from that other experience. And which is why that other experience, there's some resonance that attaches to your own being. And that's when it becomes difficult to just separate yourself from it. Because if you weren't triggered at all, you wouldn't have any emotional reaction, you wouldn't have an energetic reaction, you wouldn't have any kind of reaction at all. You would just look at it and go, oh, okay, I feel what you're saying. I see what you're saying. But it's those other triggers within us, that the feeling of needing to do something different, the feeling of needing and feeling obligated to help this person, the feeling of not wanting that pain, that anger, that whatever it is to happen anymore, and then not being able to feel that cord separate from yourself. So that's to me, there always has to be some sort of resonance between yourself and the other event in order for it to not go away. So the first place to look, of course, is, separate yourself from the moment the best you can, and to try and get in your own energy, and then look within yourself to really trace back, and where does this core wound originate? Where does this place within me that is in resonance with this that I'm having trouble identifying at the moment? So anytime you have a trigger, that's the first place I would go.
Yeah, even if your trigger isn't a person.
Right.
I mean, even if your trigger is just an energy that's in the environment, or perhaps it's a spiritual energy that's come to you, or we talk a lot about entity attachments, and, that energy has consciousness. So it can impact us, and maybe we won't know where the source of that energy is coming from, but we know how it's making us feel. And we still have to look internally and say, okay, why is that energy able to take hold and rest within me and come inside? Why am I bringing in and internalizing this? And like you said, you have to look for the root of that. You have to look for the cause. What's being triggered for you? What's actually resonating and drawing that energy to you?
Absolutely true. It doesn't always have to be a person or a notable event in your own life. And the more developed you are as an empath, the more clairsentient you are in your own right. You can be able to trace that back within your own energy and body and go, wait, there's this little section there that seems like it's been with me for a very long time, maybe lifetimes even. Like, let me see what this is. Like, you don't always have to actually identify what it is, just that it's there. Let me see if I can change this. Let me see if I can transmute this or turn this into something different that doesn't resonate so viciously with this, whatever this trigger is.
I actually, one of my clients that I've been working with for quite a while, she came to me because she had this neck pain, this horrible neck pain, and it was always there for her. She remembered, she was like, I know exactly when it started. I was 14 and my mom got mad at me and she hit me over the head with a shoe. And my neck hurt ever since from that point forward. Well, logically, that's not realistic that you're going to have chronic neck injury and pain for your whole life, as in her 40s. if you've been trying. She's seen chiropractors, she'd seen, all sorts of massage therapists, she'd tried acupuncture. And so we started to look into it. And when we looked into it, we found that on other strands of expressions, or past lives, as people also refer to them, she had 4 different past lives where she had had some sort of trauma to her neck. So this was a resonant energy that was happening to her on multiple levels. And so we had to address it on each of these different levels. And she was bringing that energy into this expression and creating situations that would re-trigger this neck injury so that she would be forced to deal with this on a higher level. So sometimes the energies that are impacting us aren't even in this expression that we're in right now. Sometimes you can just wake up one morning. There's all kinds of cases where kids will suddenly start thinking they're dying, and there's no reason for them to think that, but they're sure that they're dying, and their behavior will escalate and escalate and escalate until it gets to this critical point, and the next morning they wake up and they're fine. Well, when a healer looks at that, then, this was a story I'd heard from one of my teachers. When she looked at that experience, she saw, as a child in another expression, he had died at that age. So what he was really doing was approaching this death point, and he didn't know how to deal with the emotions that were coming up. Mm-hmm. So that's another aspect of, I think, being an empath is being impacted on all these different levels as well.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Well, my empathic awareness came because, I had just been living my life. And I remember there was a particular day I was at work. And at that time I was working retail and selling clothes. And I was the only person in the store. And on that day, I couldn't stop crying. I couldn't stop crying. And there was no significant reason in my life at that point that there was nothing going on that had caused to me to feel out of sorts, to want to cry, to be sad, any of those things. And so I was trying to figure out, what is going on? What is it? And I realized that during that particular time, about 10 years earlier, I'd had a significant life event that had happened. And my body and my emotional self was remembering the trauma and experiencing the trauma at a present moment where it was safe, where it hadn't been safe previously. Right. So I was having this level of recall. I couldn't explain it. I didn't know where it was coming from. And it was literally trapped emotional energy that I was releasing. So based on that, I started doing copious amounts of research. What is this? Am I the only person that's experienced this? Do emotions get trapped in the body? Is that a real thing? Am I just going crazy? I thought I'd gotten myself to a level where I was under control and I had emotional stability, and I had, which meant it was now time to heal. Right. So that's when my empathic awareness really came. That was 2011. It was actually 11/11/11. So that was a very significant day for me.
I love that number.
Yeah, exactly. 11/11/11 was when I realized I was an empath. And then I realized the next year, that's actually Empath Awareness Day. It was 11/11.
Go figure.
I know. I was like,
you're so in tune.
I know. Oh, what confirmation. Thank you. Yeah. So that kind of thing, realizing that, this is part of a very normal human experience. All of us have empathy as humans. It's a human trait. Right. Some of us experience empathy on a completely different kind of level. It's not just, I see you and I understand your experience, or I can, I felt sadness too, so I can understand your sadness. No, it's, I feel your sadness. I feel the depth of where you're at. I understand truly where you're coming from. I feel your intentions. I feel your motivations. I feel the presence you're bringing to this moment. I oftentimes people will say things and I'll be able to restate it for them in a really clear and concise manner. I'm like, oh, yeah, that's exactly what I meant.
Yeah, I remember there was this one time I was hanging out with some friends at a bar, and I went to the restroom, and I'm sitting in the stall, and my friend comes in and she goes, Jessie, I know that you are seeing something, you're getting something from people that they're not really meaning to show. And I'm like, what are you talking about? I hadn't really expressed or verbalized that, or even I didn't think anybody noticed that. I thought it was all incognito. And she said, well, I want you to tell me what's really wrong with me. And I was like, oh my goodness. Well, where do I start?
How much time do you have?
Right. I'm still on the toilet. Can you give me a minute? But I remember feeling a sense of responsibility suddenly. Like, if I start telling her what's wrong with her, am I going to be shaping her perception of herself beyond who she is? And that was really scary for me too. So I think, and that was something I had to kind of come to terms with as a healer. Even still, I'm so uncomfortable telling somebody, oh, you're an angel. Like, oh, that's what's going on. You're an incarnated angel. You're other things too, but I haven't yet been able to do that, because what if they're not ready for that? Or what if that means something completely different to them, and I'm suddenly shaping their belief system in a way they're not prepared for?
Sometimes you just say stuff and you just let it go.
This is true too.
Yeah, because when I was told, I was like, okay, buddy. All right. I don't know what that means, but sure.
Yeah.
Well, I think, that's, again, part of being empathic. We take responsibility for other people's reactions, both emotionally and how they react. And sometimes that's a really common learned behavior. If I say something and you might slightly twitch, or maybe your eye moves, or you look down at the floor, or, you give some kind of body reaction to it. The former me probably would have at that point just kind of shut up,
right,
and quiet, and okay, you're not interested in what I have to say. It's a little different now. When I'm guided to speak truth, well, it just kind of comes out. And most of the time when I tell people, it's like, I'm personally not going to remember this later.
Right.
It's right. I'm not here to.
I'm just a channel, right?
I'm just a channel. This is all just coming from a different
your information
source, and I won't remember what I've said to you.
Well, I think there's a time where you can develop your skills and use your empathic abilities and go, okay, this is what I'm getting. What do I feel they're ready to hear?
Right.
And then you just kind of feeling out the information that you're getting. I'm like, okay. And then it kind of presents itself in a way. And sometimes you're just surprised. You're surprised at what they can accept, what they can hear, and where they're at. Sometimes, they surprise themselves.
Well, we talked about boundaries earlier. And I think a huge part of boundaries is intention. And what is the intention behind your actions and your motivation? So for me, when I'm starting a session with somebody, for instance, or if I recognize the conversation has transitioned into a session with somebody that may not even be a client yet, I have set my own personal intention. I only receive the information that's going to be beneficial and helpful to that person at this point. I don't want to know what they need to know next year. I don't want to know that. That's not helpful. I don't want to hold it. I don't want to hold anything beyond the conversation.
Right.
So I'm very clear with myself. Okay, yes. Okay, I'm tuning into this person. Okay, I'm tuning into their higher self. Okay, now give me the information they need right now. And I think that also helps when when I go out to a crowd. I used to not be able to go to concerts or shows because I'd become so overwhelmed by the emotions of the people. And it was interesting. My husband, he loves concerts. It's his favorite thing. So he asks that all birthday, Father's Day, and Christmas presents be held, and that I instead accompany him to concerts, which is like, whew, that was a rough gift for a while there. Like, man, I think one concert per year covers all three of those, right? Which sounds absurd, to other people. But I remember I was at this Anthrax concert, of all things, because he loves metal. Yeah. I don't even think I'd ever heard Anthrax before we went to that show. And suddenly I was in a room full of all of these people that were so excited and so happy and so wonderful. And it was the most amazing crowd I'd ever been in. And instead of standing there going, I need to protect myself, I need to shield myself, I was like, this feels awesome. And I got into it and I was able to really enjoy it. But my intention was that I want to be able to go to these shows and not suffer through them. And so by doing that, I was able to feel and receive what wasn't suffering, what was the joy. And so I set that as my intention moving forward. And we're going to a concert this weekend. And I'm excited. Because now I'm like, oh, it's a whole room full of people.
I know.
Oh, can I ground them all?
Experience, a large group of people having a really good time.
Yeah.
That's like an empathic dream.
Oh my gosh. It's like a high like no other now. Yeah.
I know. I went to a Blazer game a couple of years ago. I got some free tickets, and I'm not really a huge sports fan at all. And I was like, well, they're free tickets. They're floor tickets. Like, how do you say no to that? So I went, and I was like, wow, this is so much fun. I'm cheering for both sides. I don't really care who wins. I just want to be part of the experience of being there and having fun. And that also happened to me. I got invited to something, again, I never do, horse track racing outdoor at the outdoor horse track. And
at Portland Meadows.
Yeah, Portland Meadows. And they have outdoor tables. And in the summer, it's really nice because you can go out there, and people were having fun and having a good time. I can't tell you, literally, when those horses crossed the finish line, oh my goodness. I just remember being like, can we just keep doing that? Like, I don't care who wins, but the whole crowd cheering, and it was like head to toe chills. And I was like, wow, this is kind of like a high. This is really cool to experience this burst of energy. People don't realize how energetic they are. And so sometimes there are definitely a lot more blessings now that I am able to accept and receive. A lot of my life was suffering, and I realized suffering was a choice.
Right.
You talked about mental illness. And social anxiety.
Right.
Those things are really, really common in the empathic world. Having been having a diagnosis of depression, social anxiety disorder, I have those diagnoses.
Me too.
But being careful to not label ourselves with that, and realizing that it was just a time period where I needed extra help, and the medical community did help me, bridge to a place where I could get to a better awareness. I don't take medications. I don't ascribe to those beliefs that I am depressed or I am, I have social anxiety. I do sometimes still get really overwhelmed. There's a difference between overwhelm and anxiety.
Right.
And that for me was another huge, huge thing in learning between being empathic, because I used to get overwhelmed a lot, and that would turn into anxiety.
Right.
Because I thought they were one and the same. I thought the vibrations.
They feel very similar.
They do. Very, very similar. That overwhelmed feeling of, I don't know what's happening. I don't know what's going on. I don't understand.
And the desperation to make it stop.
Right. I need out of this.
Right. Escape.
And
that's how we develop our addictions and our drug abuse,
our coping skills.
Right.
Totally. So for me, learning the difference between overwhelm and anxiety was huge. That I could go to the mall and not be scared, and that it's okay to be overwhelmed sometimes. Then I ground myself. I check into my own body. Back in the beginning, I used to have this thing I would say to myself that I didn't realize I was grounding when I was doing it. I would say my name. I am Hannah Neal. And then I'd start listing all the things that I loved. I love Soul Coughing the Band. I love gingerbread lattes. I love books by Tom Robbins. And so I would get back into my body, because oftentimes as an empath, I was going around sensing everyone, not myself, not looking at me. And so those things, like remembering what I love, who I am, back in my body, back to my feelings, back to my experience. Okay, I don't have to feel the rest of the world right this second. And so that was really something I just realized myself. And then I realized later on, I was grounding.
Well, it's interesting. I one of my diagnoses was dissociative disorders. I had a few of them. And, my therapist, I worked for years with her, and she would do a process with me of checking back in, how many pictures are in the room? What time is it? What day is it? What color are you wearing? And this series of checking in. Okay, now how do you feel? I don't know. Okay, let's do more checking in, And I remember I got to the end of the therapy, ride. And I still had problems. I still felt like I was overwhelmed by situations. And I still felt all of these issues, even though, no, I'm not dissociating anymore. No, I'm not depressed anymore. No, I don't have anxiety anymore. I'm not getting panic attacks anymore. But something was still wrong. And that was what led me to learning about energy work and learning to work with those things. And yes, what was wrong was my boundaries, my energetic boundaries. And I didn't understand where I stopped and where other people began.
Yeah, I think both of those statements about reminding yourself who you are and then reminding yourself of your boundaries. That's the whole principle I take on energetic protection. Mm-hmm. And I think that's one of the hardest things for empaths to come to, is because they sense so much, and then they identify as an empath, and then so, well, I sense so much, and this becomes their statement rather than saying, yes, I sense things, but this is who I am. And really reminding themselves of who they truly are, and then bringing more of that energy of their self into their body, and then grounding that, and then becoming themselves so fully that no other things can affect them or impede their energy in the same way. So that's kind of what I teach my clients to do, is really to embody themselves more completely and more fully. And, there you were just kind of doing it naturally, not even realizing it, like saying, reminding yourself of who you are in order to ground and not feel everything that's going on around you. So I think that's kind of a perfect confirmation that that's exactly what we need to do. Not put up all these boundaries, not put up all these protection bubbles in order to keep ourselves from feeling, but really to kind of like embrace our gifts as well as ourselves, because there's a balance between the two. They're there for a reason. They're there for us to utilize it. They're there because it's a natural part of who we are. But that part of who we are is also the thing that we got to remind ourselves of. We're not that energy down the street where the guy is like raging,
yelling at his dog.
We're not that. I mean, in some regard, we can get into the philosophy of all is one, and we are. But for practical purposes here, it's just like, you're not that. You can feel that, but you don't want to carry that with you.
Right. Well, yeah, you bring up everybody is one, and yeah, if you look at our root, we all stem back to one.
Right.
And sure, that's where it is. But there's a reason we're expressing as individuals. Mm-hmm. There's a reason that we're all here individually expressing and learning and experiencing from our perspectives, because that's important as well. Mm-hmm. We don't all look at the painting the same. Thank God.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Right. Thank God for that. Thank God that we all do definitely come with a different perspective.
We would all be cluttered around the same darn painting. I mean, that's the best painting ever. Let me see it.
Don't you love it? Isn't it so pretty?
You're in my way.
It's my painting.
Our painting. We're one.
Right.
But like,
we are the painting.
Exactly. But I think the other thing I know for sure, Brandon and I have talked a lot about this, where the idea of, because we both had come to this on our own, and then we're talking and sharing and realizing, oh, you don't bubble yourself. You don't do the pyramid of protection. Oh, you're not putting the mirror wall between you and the other people. I'm not either anymore. Interesting. Why aren't you? Because I know who I am. Mm-hmm. And I'd had a teacher, and I think I'd mentioned this earlier, tell me about protection. I had gone to him, and I was plagued. I felt like as soon as I awoke and understood that there were all these other energies around, that there were such things as demons and angels, and that there were such things as ghosts and all these different things, and fairies, and I was feeling so overwhelmed, and I felt like everything was coming at me at once, and that was my perspective, and that's what I was creating. But I didn't understand it, so I was talking to this master, and I said, how do you protect yourself from this stuff? And he goes, well, I don't. And I was like, what do you mean?
What do you mean, right?
How come nothing's bugging you? You don't have anything bugging you? Like your computer stuff, it all works fine? Like you're not tripping over everything? Why not? And he said, because you need to trace yourself back to the root, to who you are, who you were, what your vibration is when you first separated from source. And that expression is you. and you bring that into yourself, and then nothing can rock you from that. And
exactly.
I didn't understand it at the time, but trying to understand it, going through the process of understanding what he was saying, it took me about 6 months. It was really a brilliant thing. I was like, that's it. And I suddenly realized one day when I had left the house, oh, I didn't bubble myself. Wait, I haven't thought about that pyramid for a while, and that person's not bothering me at all. And why? Why is that? And it really is because, I really know who I am now. And I'm really comfortable with who I am. And I'm not trying to be somebody else. I'm not trying to reject the parts of myself. And I bring it all in. And then if something comes up now, it's a lesson. It's like, I'm just coming out of some pretty hard lessons. And, I wanted to blame the person who made me feel these things. I wanted to be so angry. And I held that anger, and it really rocked me. And especially, when they told me to calm down when I was trying to express myself. And I had to walk away. I had to remove myself from the situation and from the energy completely of that environment. And then it was, I was triggered. This is what it stirred up inside of me. It reminded me of I need to maintain my energy a certain way for other people to be comfortable, or I need to, accept someone else right where they are, even though they're not accepting me. These are things that were hard lessons in childhood that didn't go well, created triggers for me. And so now that I've moved through those experiences and through that suffering, I've actually gotten to a point where I'm kind of a little grateful. I'm not happy about it, but I'm a little grateful to him for triggering me in those ways, because how else would those things have come up? And then they would have been stored, and they'd have been a trigger that I wouldn't have maybe been in the right space to receive and understand as I was when I received it from him. And those opportunities, they keep coming until you deal with them.
Exactly. Talking about the patterns again. Which is, I think, also something that's really interesting to note, that a lot of people who identify as empaths do have a challenge here on this earth in having to deal with toxic relationships. Yeah. We talk about the empath and the narcissist, and how a lot of empathic people tend to attract narcissistic energy.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Right. That hasn't happened to any of us, right? No. Like no one here has experienced that. And that's oftentimes that tends to be a really common pattern among empaths, to have people in their lives, because oftentimes empathic people tend to give away their power.
Well, and what is a narcissist? A narcissist is somebody who can't feel what they're feeling. They project it onto other people. And then those people are feeling it for them, and then they can be mad at those people.
Right.
And they can be hurt by those people, and they're not hurt by themselves. So, of course, they're going to tag up with an empath who's like, I'm right here receiving you, buddy.
Right. And I'm responsible for everything.
You're going to own it. Yeah.
And then you're a trigger, so it's your fault.
Right, exactly.
So on the same note, it's your trigger, so it's your fault.
Your fault.
Exactly.
So it all comes back to you.
And ultimately, it is.
Right.
It is all you, because you chose the narcissist. And you chose the narcissist because the vibrations are there to stir up what you need to stir up and pull out.
Right. And to see that authentic self. There are a lot of things that oftentimes as children, we, because of sometimes the experiences we had, we labeled ourselves as bad. We labeled ourselves as an outsider, not belonging. We're not lovable. We're not worthy. There's a lot of truths that we've often layered because of our experience, and we've attached those truths and those beliefs to the experience. And so they do become true.
Right.
So we have to go back and look at those patterns, and especially when somebody comes into our life in the present day and triggers us.
Right.
We talk about finding the root cause. Where did that go?
Right.
Oh, this reminds me of, an issue I had in my family with, a parental figure or a teacher I had, or somebody else who had a level of authority over me who either did or said, or there was an experience that I've attached a belief to. Oh, okay, I can fix that. I am lovable. I'm lovable now. I was lovable then. And shifting that so that we can love ourselves more, because that's really sometimes the hardest part for empathic people, is to love themselves, to see themselves as worthy. It's so much easier to love other people. So much easier. And that's often a default. We will love the smithereens out of the people around us. But when it comes to our needs, when it comes to, sometimes even feeding ourselves, taking care of ourselves, honoring who we are as people, as our authenticness, all of those things are constant challenges. Remembering, I deserve the right to show up who I am. I don't have to explain myself to anyone.
Right.
I don't have to change myself to make you feel more comfortable.
Right.
Your uncomfortableness is yours. Oh, okay. That shifts a lot of things. So I think that's just a really important part to bring up.
I agree. Yeah. Yeah. I was just talking with not a new potential client. He's a he's a real salt of the earth kind of guy, and he's very curious by what I do. And so he was sitting there and he said, "So if I were going to see you and I told you I had this person that I just can't get out of my head, I can't, I know it's not a healthy relationship and I keep going back to them, and what would you tell me? What would you say?" And I was like, well, I would ask you, what is it that you're not dealing with? What is it that in that connection is resonating in you that has nothing to do with them? Because they're only there to show you something inside of you. And he was like, wait a minute. So it doesn't even have to do with them? Well, usually no. Nope. It's usually you. And once you get to the place where you're like, oh, you remind me of how my mom used to talk to me, and it used to make me feel so small, and I wanted to be big and strong, and so I'm going to show you how big and strong I am. And you're going to keep doing that with that person until you recognize that really what you're trying to deal with is that wounded little boy. Then you can move on. And he goes, oh my God, that's exactly what it was. Sorry, I didn't mean to read you. But he went away, he went off, and I continued my conversation with the other people I was visiting. And he came back about an hour later and he goes, you were totally right. I completely get it. And I saw him a week later and he was like, I'm so over that relationship. Thank you. That was exactly what I needed to hear. Because we want to blame the other people. We want to blame them for making us hurt, for making us feel these things, even if we don't
exactly. It's
understand.
Easy.
Yeah.
If I make my problems your problems, my emotions are your problems, then I don't have to deal with them, right? It's not up to me. Well, just you need to fix my sadness because I don't want to deal with it. So it's your fault.
Right. And so you keep making me feel it.
Don't even think to look at themselves, though. I mean, we're taught to experience the world externally.
Exactly.
And so people respond to the world externally, which gives them the habit and learned behavior of pointing their finger everywhere but where it should be, is right at themselves.
Right.
I always tell people, if you're pointing fingers, you need to take that finger and point it right back at yourself. The moment you feel like I need to point a finger and say, hey, it's your fault, it's you're to blame, you just take that finger and look right in the mirror and point it right back at yourself.
There's always three pointing right back at you.
Exactly. So everything you're going to say to that person is actually things you need to hear yourself.
Bingo.
So oftentimes when we're angry at other people for hurting us, for not listening to who we are, for dismissing who we are, I like to do that a lot. I like to get mad at people for dismissing me. How could you not listen to me? And then I realize, oh yeah, that's because I don't always listen to myself. Right. I sometimes dismiss the things I say. I don't listen. Right. So when I start listening to myself and not dismissing who I am, guess what? People will stop behaving that way towards me. I won't attract that pattern anymore.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's gotten less over the years. That's true for me.
Yeah.
This whole thing also brings up another point that we were going to mention on Woo Wars.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Woo Wars.
Woo
we need to
Wars.
do one of those because we're so ready. We have so much material.
So Woo Wars is basically what we've decided to call the segment of the show when we have woo-woo topics that are sometimes controversial, sometimes people use or skew information in order to benefit themselves. And then you have these healer battles where they start yelling at each other and like, no, yeah, it's your ego, no, your ego, no, not my ego.
You're in your ego. I am completely neutral right now.
So as far as this topic goes, it's like, okay, so if everybody else is being the mirror for you, I've had experiences in my own life where the person was being the mirror for me, and they were exposing a trigger that I was experiencing in that moment. And that person was, well, everything I'm doing is just merely a mirror for yourself anyways. Translation is, therefore, I don't have to do anything different because it's really your trigger and your problem. So I'm just mirroring back to you what's in you. It's true, but it doesn't mean the person's not being an asshole.
Right. Relationship takes two people, right? It's a co-creative process. Yeah. And that doesn't necessarily mean like people who are treating you badly. Like I said, people who dismiss me, people do dismiss me. And that is because I dismiss myself.
Right.
But that doesn't mean that I need to allow that energy to exist in other people.
Well, they dismiss you because of where they're at.
Right.
But it harms you. It triggers you because you dismiss yourself.
Exactly.
And, speaking of the woo wars, I just had a woo war recently. And, I'm trying to share with this person that, the way you're communicating isn't what you're wanting to communicate. It's not effective. It's not coming across the way you want it to. And I was trying to share this with them, and they were responding back, and it kind of got into this back and forth thing. And I said, they said, don't project your stuff onto me. And I was like, well, how about we're mirroring for each other right now? We're both mirroring. Well, which of the 7 mirrors are you talking about? Like, well, I don't know. I didn't know there was more than one mirror. I'm not sure what you're talking about. And that's like what you Brandon mentioned earlier about how people will use the concepts in the woo world to really maintain their belief system that they're not the problem.
And not do anything different.
And not do anything different. Yeah. And so, I was like, we're mirroring for each other. I'm not projecting onto you what my issues are. I'm responding to what you're doing, but it's triggering this part in me, and I'm triggering this part in you. And then all of a sudden, the person, like, they tuned out and they went and listened to their higher self and their guides, and they came back, oh, you're just not ready yet for the truth. Oh, well, how do you respond to that? Like, I'm not ready. I'm kind of thinking you're not ready. And then you just have to walk away and remind yourself, oh, wait, who am I again? What's me? Am I willing to receive the mirrored message that I just got? Okay, yeah, let's go deal with that.
In a sense, they were right. You weren't ready to hear it at that time. You were triggered, which is why you left.
Right.
What they weren't ready to hear, and this is not the place they looked, is themselves.
Right.
They looked at you. They didn't examine their own state of being. They didn't do their introspection.
Right.
They looked at you because that's where they already saw the problem was before they even went and talked to their guides.
Right. I was already identified as the problem.
But the answer they got was the truth, though. So it confirmed their reality.
Exactly.
But they didn't ask enough questions.
Right.
Right, definitely.
And the nature of the woo war.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, it's a very human thing. We all have ego.
Right.
Right. We are on this earth to learn about duality, so that we can go back to the expression we were, the wholeness that we were before incarnating to this earth. So ego is something that helps us and can also be harmful sometimes. We talk about having a healthy ego. A lot of times empaths struggle with being seen. They struggle with their power, who they are authentically, and really embodying that, holding it, anchoring it, and showing up with it on a daily basis and not hiding away. That is something that sometimes people like to point at you and say, oh, you're being egotistical. How dare you talk about how you're doing this, how it's all you, and being, centered on yourself. Well, oftentimes we spend most of our life externalizing everything. That there is a point when we have to come inside and we have to look at ourselves and really look at our own ego. How is this serving me? Is it serving me?
Yeah, some of the most egotistical people I have ever encountered in my life are screaming at me to defend the ego, how important it is. And for me, I really had no ego. For a long time, I didn't even have a sense of myself. Brandon, you'd mentioned earlier about how, you forget who you are as an empath because you're receiving so much information. Well, that was definitely me. I didn't forget who I was. I never knew. Like, I had no concept. If you asked me, what do you want to eat right now? I don't know. What do you want to eat? Where do you want to go? I don't know. Where do you want to go? Well, what's your dream? I don't have one. That was really how I operated.
What's your dream?
Yeah. What's your dream? That sounds good. Let's do that.
What she said.
What she said. Yeah, exactly. And I can think of a few people who who have really huge egos, and I used to surround myself with those people because it was like a way of compensating for my lack of ego. I don't know how to defend myself, so I'm going to surround myself with people who are on the defense, who are going to show me in every way what it looks like to stand up and speak your mind. Well, those people were speaking a lot more than just their mind. So until I really learned that, no, I have to come into myself. I have to develop this sense of self. Now I don't have those people around me anymore. They're not comfortable around me. So if you find yourself in a position where you're surrounded with people, where you're frustrated or hurt or angry, you got to look at what are they really trying to show you? Because once you learn it, they're not going to be around you anyway. They don't want to be around you.
Exactly.
Because your ego is competing with their ego now.
Exactly. How dare you? How dare you?
So then you don't need the protection.
And when you lose that trigger, there is nothing to fire back at them.
Right.
They're not going to be around you because all that's left is the truth that they expose about themselves.
Right.
And they're usually not ready to look there.
No.
And so those people just fall away. Mm-hmm. And that's what I like about, the experience that you mentioned earlier about the, how did you put it? Well, you said it a certain way, but the trigger that the experience you had that I was there for.
Being a mirror, the mirroring trigger.
The mirroring trigger. Mm-hmm. And then it reminded me of experiences that I had in my own life where I was in his shoes, mm-hmm. and he was defending his position, and he's like, I'm not being triggered. And I was like, oh, yeah, you are. Because everything about his energy, everything, his body posture, his the words he was using, his breathing, everything about his behavior like signaled trigger. Mm-hmm. And he, of course,
though his words and his voice were very calm.
Yeah, his words and his voice were very calm. But there was definitely an edge to it, and he justified it by, well, if I'm being attacked, then of course I'm going to respond this way. But
fight or flight, adrenaline rises, Brandon.
Of course.
Yes, I'm aware of that.
And I recognize that as a trigger with myself from mm-hmm. other situations I was in, where I didn't think I was being triggered. I was reacting to what this other person was giving me, mm-hmm. and it was really nonsensical stuff, accusations, and they reacted like with their triggers to something I said, and it wasn't exactly like something that would normally happen with mm-hmm. another person. It was if I talked about the same situation, and then they approached me with such ferocity, and then of course my instant reaction was the same as his.
Mm-hmm. To meet the ferocity.
And then they were like, well, you are so aggressive right now. You need to, I'm like, that just pissed me off.
Right. Right.
I'm aggressive.
Right. I'll show you aggressive.
I'm not aggressive. Are you effing kidding me? And that was my response. And so it just escalated the situation. And mm-hmm. stepping away from all of that, there was other experiences after that. And I looked at it again. I'm like, oh, wait a minute. Mm-hmm. This was a trigger.
Yeah, yeah.
Any kind of reaction, energetic, emotional, any kind of reaction is a mm-hmm. trigger. And I was able to trace that back to a time in my childhood where I could see how this related. Mm-hmm. I could see how like being falsely accused, and because I was punished severely a couple times as a child for being falsely accused about something, and it happened a couple times, and so that became my trigger.
Right.
I had to prove that I was right, and I had to, so seeing that, I was able to resolve that trigger and dissolve that energy within myself. And then stepping into the situation where I was a part of, no longer did I react to even the same energy. I was able to see it with a peace and calmness about myself. And really, there was no other way to put it other than like seeing the obvious trigger on the other side.
Right. Well, and I have to say, like, that was the best thing about having you there, was that for me, I was ready to admit I was fully triggered. I could not see, I couldn't see my behavior. I couldn't see their behavior. And there's Brandon next to me going, well, I'm noticing that, blah, 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 blah. I'm like, oh, damn, that's where I want to be. Okay, now I need to go home and look at this much better, because I am clearly not capable of doing this without being triggered right now. Yeah, I was way too trigger happy.
Well, sometimes when we get into an emotional place, it's
Trigger
hard.
happy.
It's hard to be the observer, because
Yes.
we do get triggered over and over and over again. That oftentimes when we're already in an emotional triggered state, that, an easy thing. Could you just calm down, Jesse? Right. Especially, and that triggers me too, especially if I feel like I am working really hard at staying calm.
I don't know how calm I'm being.
Right. If you can say that to me when I'm trying to rip off your face, but don't say it to me when I am holding on to my chair and I am breathing deeply and I'm doing all the things that I need to do to keep myself from jumping out and screaming and acting inappropriately.
Right.
So I think, being able to observe our emotions, even in hindsight, talk about going within and not looking at a situation like what you experienced and going, oh, well, I was bad. I acted badly, or labeling that with a lot of those duality words. This was a negative
The
experience.
value assessments.
Right. Those things
I was naughty.
take away opportunities for growth,
Right.
because you've now labeled them as something where they really aren't. They're an experience. So I try to think of everything as growth and experience, not good or bad. It's growth and experience. Some of it's more challenging, that's for sure, but it is all growth when you really want to get down to it.
Yeah, that's one of the things I've been working with, not only with myself for the last 10 years, but with people around me. When they come to me and they're like, oh God, there's all these problems. And as soon as I start to hear the complaint train going, I start talking to them. Well, what if you didn't look at it as a problem? What if you looked at it as an opportunity? And not all opportunities are we ready to pick up, so you don't have to beat yourself up for not taking that opportunity of this disagreement and going, okay, I'm going to really look at the internal self right now. Maybe just recognizing, now I see it as an opportunity. And the next time I'll be able to take that opportunity and carry it further and look a little bit deeper, so that you're not valuing yourself as being good or bad for seizing or not seizing that opportunity. It's like quitting smoking. Try not to think of it as quitting smoking. What if you think of it as practicing? I'm just practicing not smoking. I'm going to practice today not having that cigarette through these experiences. And what does that look like? So that when you go and you have the cigarette, you're not telling yourself, oh, I failed. I'm a mess up. I did this thing that's so bad. It's important to create that space for yourself.
Some things like that too. It's like, rather than set this constraint and like all these judgment calls on yourself on what you're supposed to be doing.
Right.
This applies to anything, whether you're looking through triggers, like, how does Source see yourself in your triggers? Absolute neutrality and love.
Yeah.
Acceptance. Acceptance, love, neutrality. It's like, this is what you're going through. This is your experience. This is your journey. This is what you're meant to go through.
Right.
So rather than like going, oh man, I need to quit smoking, I'm going to quit smoking. Oh, I had a cigarette. Oh, I effed up. I had the cigarette. Instead of looking at that and going, making all those judgment calls, looking at yourself going, instead, okay, well, I really feel like I want to have a cigarette, and I could, but why do I really want the cigarette in the moment? Okay, is there something else I can be doing instead? Sometimes you might go, well, I'm just going to have the cigarette anyways because I really can't handle the moment right now. And that's okay.
Yeah.
But then you're like, okay, well, I'm still going to do this every time. And just instead of making the promise to quit smoking, make the promise to examine every time you do.
Exactly.
And then it
What's
becomes,
making you want the cigarette?
Right.
Right.
What's the motivation?
Right.
What's the intention behind my actions? Because a lot of times we have coping mechanisms that we don't even realize are coping mechanisms. Jesse and I were actually just even talking this morning about how there was a time in my life when I would get bored and I would eat a lot. Because I was bored and it was something I could do to fill the time of my boredom. And so I'd watch a lot of TV and I'd eat. And when I got to the point where I was really seriously overweight and having a lot of health issues as a result, when I finally examined my own behavior, and it wasn't about losing weight and I have to stop eating this or I have to cut this out, and not thinking of it as an all or nothing. I think that all or nothing thinking, again, it eliminates possibilities. And all or nothing thinking is oftentimes narcissistic behavior.
Well, it's so black and white.
Right.
You know, I talk with the people a lot about, set yourself up for success. Don't set yourself up for failure. And if you're setting yourself up for success, you're not even using language like I fucked up or I failed or I didn't do this or I can't. You're instead, giving yourself that room and going, oh, wow, that was too big for me.
Right. Well, I think we talk a lot about, like, at least I do, the energy of grace.
Yes.
Grace is an energy I use a lot to transmute a lot of old pain, both not only for myself, but a lot of times for my clients. So many of us feel like we have to be perfect because we were always told what we should be. Well, you should be this. Well, if you really wanted to do this, you should do this. The coulda, woulda, shouldas, which really turned into didn't.
Well, and how many times are we defined by the people around us?
Right. Well, externalized belief, who are we externally? How do people see us? Am I in charge of your perception of me? Is that my responsibility? Do I have to be understood by you? Or do I believe that I'm understood no matter what?
Or am I still okay even if I'm not understood?
Absolutely.
Do I need to understand me? Not always.
Not always.
Sometimes I'm good not knowing what.
do I need to be understood to know who I am?
No.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of those beliefs that, we create as a standard of perfection. This has to be perfect. And if it's not perfect, then I'm missing the mark. No, I disagree with that. I sometimes think missing the mark is the whole point, is that we hold ourselves to a standard of grace that allows us to be authentically ourselves. And sometimes I'm going to show up as a very messy and emotional Hannah Neal.
Well, and this reminds me of, one of the things that we do that we'll eventually get more into is channeling. And we mentioned Bashar earlier in another show. And Hannah Neal was channeling Archangel Raphael. And we were asking about emotions and emotional healing. And one of the things that we were told was that, that humans resist their emotions. They only want the good ones. But all of the emotions are part of it. They're all important. And that learning that these are one layer in the experience and accepting that is so critical. And switching the idea of pain being an adversary and hurt being an adversary into recognizing it as a teacher. If you can switch that idea, then it doesn't matter that you're hurting, because hurting is leading you to the lesson. And that's okay too. It's okay to hurt. Life isn't always supposed to be roses and wonderful and happiness. And I think we get stuck in that, especially in our current culture where everything is so immediately available. You want something to eat, you can go to a restaurant and get it immediately. You can even 3D print things that you want now immediately, for goodness sake. Instant gratification. And so we have this idea that if our needs aren't being met, then something is wrong. Well, yeah, something is wrong. You're not looking at what are your needs about. Where are they coming from?
Are they needs or are they wants?
Right.
Right. What do I really need? Yeah, definitely.
And stop resisting being in pain. It's okay to be in pain. Sometimes things hurt.
Right. I always talk about people with even myself, with my clients, that there was a time in my life when feeling uncomfortable, I would do anything to avoid feeling uncomfortable.
Right.
Anything to avoid it, which oftentimes meant removing myself from life.
And compromising yourself.
Right. And not being around other people because I felt so uncomfortable. Well, that uncomfortableness now is part of my learning process. Right. I go to the places where I'm uncomfortable and look at them very, very closely and go, why am I uncomfortable? Oh, this is where I have more growth. That's why it's uncomfortable. And we don't talk about that as far as, emotional health and spiritual growth, that getting uncomfortable, that's where you're supposed to be. That's really what's pushing you and molding you to find the wholeness of your authentic self. I don't want to be the same person 5 years from now that I am right today.
Well, and I think what just popped into my head also is, we talked about protections earlier. And I do think there is a certain amount of value to protections, because when you first start the journey, it is overwhelming. There is
absolutely.
a lot going on, and there's a lot of clutter and debris built up. And so, there is a space and a time for using these protections, using your bubbles, using your pyramids, using your mirrors, using your whatever your protection, your crystals, your oils, your, all of these things, because that gives you space. And it creates an open area. We talk a lot about in energy work, I'm going to hold space for you while you process this. I'm going to hold the space and create the space for you. So you're really creating space for yourself. So a lot of my clients, when they first come to me, they're so overwhelmed with all the problems. I mean, it's not just their husband. It's not just their kids. It's not just their boss. It's not just the bills. It's not just the rent. It's not it's not all these, it's everything coming at once. Well, yeah, in that it's really hard to look at the lessons because you are overwhelmed, and giving yourself that space. And when you can do that and you get to a place where, I'm going to process this one thing at a time, and then you realize the overwhelming is also part of the lesson. You're flooding yourself with things because you need to get to that level of desperation before you're willing to break the belief that these things are all happening to me.
Right. Or that I'm helping to create this.
Exactly.
Right. I'm choosing to take on other people's burdens.
Right.
And be responsible for their burdens. So when, my coworker tells me about the tough time she's having at her home, or the people at church tell me about the difficulties with their health, and I listen to that and I take that in, and then I assume responsibility for it. I take it on as mine, and then I start carrying that energetic debris around.
Right. And then you'll see that everywhere you look.
Right.
Until you realize that.
And so when we get burdened energetically. And I think that's sometimes when protections really do help. I know for me, back in the beginning, it helped cut a level of what I call distortion,
right? Negative
distortion. A lot of times I think of empaths kind of like a radio signal. And so they're transmitting and they're also receiving. But at the same time, sometimes we have to tune the radio to get the best signal. And a lot of times empaths carry a lot of distorted debris, stuff that isn't theirs, whether that's energetic stuff, belief systems, all of those things. And so the signal comes in really spotty. It's a lot of static. It's a lot of distorted. You can sometimes hear words, not always. And for me, being able to do a level of energetic protection, create the crystalline tube, or even hold something like a smoky quartz or black tourmaline, was able to cut some of that distorted energy so I could feel myself, my authenticness that much more clearly.
Right.
And then realizing, that stuff isn't me.
Right.
Why am I carrying it? Where did it come from? Who does it belong to? And how do I get rid of it?
Right, exactly.
So learning all of those things. So I think thank you for bringing that up, because I think it's very true. We're all at a place now where we don't feel like we have to every day walk out of the house with 20 minutes of meditative protections and crystals and all of that kind of thing. Not that I don't enjoy those things. I do still love crystals and rocks, but those are not things I need to do. That used to be a need. I couldn't leave the house without it.
Well, and it happens really fast. Once you really understand, okay, I need to start looking at these things as lessons, and I want to learn from these things. It's really quick that the shifts start. I went from bubbling and protecting myself on a daily basis to not over just a few days. I mean, it was really quick. So yeah, you might be overwhelmed and inundated right now, but give yourself that breathing room and let it be okay that you're overwhelmed. Let that be okay, and let that be the lesson in and of itself. That's where I'm at right now.
Yeah, it's the same thing I tell all my clients too. If you feel overwhelmed and you need that space, take it.
Yeah.
But the goal is to get to the point where you recognize yourself so fully within your own being that you don't need the protection anymore. Exactly. That's the goal.
Yeah.
So I always teach them the philosophy first. And I also tell them, there's a learning curve, of course. And so if you come up and the thought comes across your mind, and especially in some sort of more severe situations,
right.
paranormal situations,
right.
if the thought comes up in your mind that you need protection, then do it.
Right.
You need to do it.
Yeah, exactly.
The thought came in your mind randomly for a reason. So there are always instances where there's exceptions to the rule.
Right.
So if you need to use your tools, then use your tools.
That's why it's so important to have them in the first place, I
right.
think. So I do teach the tools of protection as well. And yeah, understand those, but
don't let your tools become a crutch.
Don't let them become exactly.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. When you start feeling like it's more than just a tool,
right?
It's just another kind of coping mechanism. It's how I'm coping with getting through life. Tools are not to be used as a crutch.
No.
They're not to be used as a coping mechanism. They're helpful. Yes, right. They're tools, just like every other kind of tool we have, but we also need to learn to set it aside.
Yeah. I used to use a pendulum, and I didn't trust my body. I didn't trust body talk, or I didn't understand quite really how to do it, I guess I would say. And I didn't live in my body, so I wasn't able to use that. So I would use this pendulum, and I remember there was this time where I was trying to do work with this person, and my pendulum broke. And I felt so like, what am I going to do? I can't do this.
How will I know the answers?
How will I know it's yes or no? and it was the best thing that ever happened, because I had to finish the session. I wasn't going to say, now I can't work with you. My pendulum broke. And I was on the phone with them, and I continued, and I got much better information. And it was like, oh, okay. Thank you. Thank you for, if you had broken at any other point, I'd just have fixed you again. But you broke now I understand. You're really saying continue on, move on without that lesson, and that became the lesson.
Yeah.
So sometimes your tools, they break and disappear.
I was at a retreat, and I had this smoky quartz tool that I used to wear all the time, and I really loved it. And it did help me. It showed up in my life exactly when I needed it. I was going through a lot of releasing of negativity of my own life, and seeing a lot of truth about some of the things that I had experienced that I had never really realized before. So some repressed memories. And the tool came and helped me with processing that negativity and understanding it for really what it was, and being able to feel a level of authenticness within myself. I never took that thing off. I wore it in the shower. I slept with it on. I never took it off, because I felt like if I took it off for a second, I was going to get attacked, and it was going to be bad. And I had all of these preconceived ideas. Well, I went to a retreat, and I was out in the woods, and it was great. And I had taken it off for the first time in I don't know how long, and I wasn't wearing it. And then my guides told me that I was supposed to give it away. And I was like, what? What are you talking about? The girl who happened to be sitting next to me was experiencing some of the same exact things I had experienced 6 months earlier. And they were saying to me, she needs this more than you do. Yeah. And I was, but I need this. I need this. What happens when I leave the woods and I'm not safe anymore, and I'm out in the world, and I oh my goodness, I can't give this away. And they're like, no, you need to give it away. So I gave it to her, and I gave her, all the things that I had been told about it, and, how to wear it and how to clean it. And then I went home. Right. And then I felt really vulnerable. And then I realized, oh, now I understand why I had to give this away. The smoky quartz was actually hampering some of my empathic abilities. Right. I could not sense with the same richness and depth with it on that I could with it off. Right. So that's why it was a tool. And I was using it as a crutch. I was using it as a way of protecting myself. But really, at that point, it was hurting me. I couldn't do the things I needed to do. I couldn't do and be the person I was authentically with it on. So realizing that, and I was like, oh, perfect. Okay, now I get it. I understand why I had to let this go and move on. Really important lesson. And the person who had actually helped me find the tool got kind of upset with me later when I wasn't wearing it. And he was saying things like, what are you doing? Why aren't you wearing it?
Where did it go?
Where did it go? And I said, well, I gave it away. You gave it away? What do you mean you gave it away? And I was like, well, I was guided to give it away. And the reason I was is because it wasn't helping me anymore. It had served its purpose and it was done. And when I said that, oh, great. Okay. Then I realized I don't need to always listen to other people and their stories about protection and what I need. I always need to listen to myself and to my guides about what it is for my protections and what I need. These people help us, but sometimes they can create a belief for us that we then have to break.
Which is uncomfortable.
Yes, uncomfortable. Definitely. But again, some of these really important lessons that we've learned about how do we move on? How do we get to places?
Yeah. So we had a lot of stuff that we wanted to share. Brandon, you want to tell the audience the other things, since we've kind of come beyond our normal time of the show? So much to talk about.
So, yeah, we mentioned before about people emailing us or sending us voicemails and questions or comments or anything. So we wanted to put our email address out there. And it's TheCrystalCocoon.gmail, right? Or at gmail.com.
At gmail.com.
And so, yeah, go ahead and do your voicemails or your voice messages or your just written out or whatever you have. And then we'll look at them before the
next show.
Upcoming shows.
Yeah. And then also as well, where we have a meetup. So if you're in the Portland area,
it's Portland, Oregon.
Then come to our meetup. It's experimental energy. So we'll be doing all the new tools that we're developing. We'll be experimenting on groups at a time and just really developing the modality that we've been building for the last couple months. So that will be on, the first one will be Monday, August 17th at 7 p.m. And you can go on Seeds of the Divine in the Portland meetup and see it there. And then it will be every other week.
And you can also find us on Facebook. We have a Crystal Cocoon, the Crystal Cocoon on Facebook, where you can see we'll post various articles and research information and our own comments here and there.
Cool pictures, links, all that kind of stuff that we talk about, interesting people that we read and we want to share with you.
Yeah. So we're so excited to share this with you guys and look forward to our relationships growing even deeper.
Absolutely. So thank you again for tuning in today. We so appreciate all of you listening. And was that it that we needed to talk about?
Thank you, Eric.
Thanks, Eric.
Thanks, Eric.
Our awesome producer.
And I think that's it. So thank you, all you beautiful people out there, wherever in the world you're listening. And that's another episode of The Crystal Cocoon.